Hello again, and welcome back to the course Life of Christ. In Class 4, we discussed the geographical context of some of the towns and villages of Judea. Then in Class 5, we looked at Jerusalem, which is an enormously important town in the history of the Bible, and especially in the time of Jesus. Today, we want to go north into the region of Galilee, and the next two videos have to do with key cities and places in the ministry of Jesus. Now, before we do that, let's go on to a little bit more historical context. There were two major events that happened in the Old Testament that impacted Galilee for a long time. The first was the defeat of the northern kingdom in 721 BC by the Assyrians. And that had the effect of not only destroying parts of that land, but also losing a lot of its Jewish population as they were taken off into exile. In fact, 10 of the 12 tribes really never came back from that exile. In their place, the Assyrians brought in many other people from other nations, other places they'd conquered, and they resettled many of those areas for hundreds of years. Then, of course, we know the Samaritans also intermarried with some of those people and expanded to fill part of the region as well. So that's the first major event that impacted the population of Galilee. And then in 586 BC, the southern nation of Judah was conquered by Babylon and carried off into exile. And so when we come to the time just before Jesus' ministry, say in the 150 BC beforehand, it's a time in which the Maccabean family is helping the Jews unite and rebel against their enemies. And eventually they win that battle, and they reestablish themselves as a nation in about 160 BC. And so you have a time now where the Jews are welcoming back and inviting back many of the other Jews that perhaps were still living in Babylon. Now it had been several hundred years that they'd been there, and they invited them to come back and resettle, especially in the northern population of Galilee. And so we had as many as 500,000 Jews that come back from Babylonian captivity and begin to resettle, and many of them end up in Galilee, start to revive some of the towns that perhaps fell into disrepair during these several hundred years, or establish new towns as well. And so these set the stage for the ministry of Jesus as he comes forward here. Now, again, we want to look at the maps. So we've already shown you a couple of these, but want to review them for our context today. The area that we're focusing on today is particularly right up here, this kind of pinkish section there of Galilee. You see the Sea of Galilee and Lake Huleh, which was there in the time of Jesus, and then the northern border up here of Israel, about where it is today. And of course, you see Samaria and Judea down here. We also want to show again the map of the tribes, in particular ones in Galilee like Zebulun and Naphtali that are mentioned in the Gospels. And then I want to focus in just a little bit more on two maps of the Galilean area. One on the right is a satellite map here that shows a mix of old and new names of towns that are there, and we see the topography a little bit more now. And then on the left, you have just a more detailed map with some of the biblical names, especially from the time of Jesus, and also some from the Old Testament as well. So again, I'd recommend that you use these maps as a reference point. As you're reading through the Gospels, it's handy to have a map right there so that you can consult, like for example, where Jesus traveled and what order he went to certain places. Then if you want to zoom just a little bit more, another map, kind of a satellite topographical map, it gives you, again, more detail about some of the important areas of Jesus' ministry. This map we also mentioned of the Decapolis, so that comes more into play as we see Jesus traveling from the western side of the Sea of Galilee across the sea to the eastern side into the area of the Decapolis, and ministering to the pagans and Gentiles that lived in that area. And then finally, again, this topographical map that I think is useful also to understand what happens with the land as you travel north and south and east and west. Again, we have several videos from the Above Israel series that I'd recommend you watch if you can get those videos. In particular, the ones about Mount Hermon, and also the Sea of Galilee in general, kind of a panoramic view. And then, of course, the Jordan River. Once again, those are great videos there. Now let's start to look at some pictures of individual places. This picture is actually taken from an area really near the cliffs of Arbel. And it's you're looking kind of northeast a little bit from this perspective. On your left, over here on this side, you have the plain of Gennesaret, all of this area. You see the northwestern part of the Sea of Galilee. If you consider that the Sea of Galilee is a clock, then you're looking at the area probably around, say, 10 o'clock, maybe even 9 o'clock, up around to 12 or 1. That's the section of the sea we're looking at. And you see some of the important towns from Jesus' ministry pointed to here about where they are. Magdala, again, is just off the map down to the right. And then the area for the Sermon on the Mount is approximately right here, as well as some of the other discourses and miracles that Jesus may have done. We also want to focus on the Jordan River. And this is not, all of Jesus' ministry doesn't happen at the Jordan River. And obviously there's other events in the Bible that happen there too, but it's important to have an understanding of this geographical feature as we look into the ministry of John and of Jesus. It's mentioned a lot in the Bible. You see it's traced here by this red line. Almost 200 times the Jordan River is mentioned, starting up in the foothills of Mount Hermon, and then winding its way down all the way south to end in the Dead Sea. Some of the events that the Bible mentioned, and you probably remember these from your Bible study, Joshua and the Israelites crossing from the eastern side over the Jordan into Canaan when they begin the conquest, Joshua chapter 4. You have John the Baptist as he begins his ministry, preaching repentance and then baptizing people in the Jordan River at several different places, not always at the same place. For example, one of these is mentioned in John 1:28. Jesus, of course, is baptized by John in the Jordan River, probably just north of the Dead Sea, and we'll look at that in just a second. And then another place mentioned in John 3 is Aenon near Salim. It's a little bit maybe west of the Jordan River, maybe in one of the little forks that comes out of the Jordan River. In the Old Testament, you also have Naaman, the Syrian, who comes to Elisha, and he's sent to the Jordan River to dip 7 times, and he's healed, 2 Kings 5. You have Elijah hiding from Ahab when he's being pursued near Jericho. And then as Elijah also dies, the day he doesn't die, the day he's taken up to heaven, Elijah and Elisha, that should say, they cross the Jordan River just before Elijah is taken up in 2 Kings 2. So again, a number of interesting events, really striking events happen in and around the Jordan River. So it's a very important one. So let's look at some of the pictures. We're going to kind of trace it from the north all the way south. As we said, it begins in the foothills of Mount Hermon near Caesarea Philippi, or Banyas today. And it's really pretty high comparatively at that point, about 1,000 feet above sea level as it's there in the foothills of Mount Hermon. You also have 2 other rivers that are there that come together to actually form the Jordan. So you have the Hasbani, the Banyas River, and then the River Dan. And this is one of those as well. Then it goes a little bit south and it meets up with Lake Huleh. If you went to Israel today, you really wouldn't see much of a lake as such. It's more like a swampy area with different ponds. They actually raise fish there in different little ponds or lakes there. And then as you go on down, you'll notice that by turns, it's pretty small and tranquil, or actually more rapid and a little bit more dangerous. Has some areas like you see in this picture that are a little bit tricky to navigate. The reason why it's called the Jordan is because of the Hebrew name Yarden, which means to descend or one who descends. And so you can see how Yarden, Jordan, you can see where that comes from. And the truth is that that's one of the main characteristics of the Jordan. It goes down so rapidly, starting high and then ends up below sea level. Now, as you keep on going south, you see this is a pretty peaceful area in the river and pretty narrow too. I think in my mind, when I thought about the Jordan at first, I thought about this broad, wide river, maybe like crossing the Mississippi River. And actually, many places you could probably walk across it. It's not deep, it's not fast, and it's not wide. Then, as it goes further south, it enters the Sea of Galilee, You can kind of be tracking this on a map if you want to. And by this point, it's already dropped 1,200 feet from up in Mount Hermon down to below sea level here. And this is kind of the little delta where it comes in to the Sea of Galilee, the northern part. Now, as you're at that area and you turn around and you look south, this is the view that you have of the Jordan, looking then across the Sea of Galilee. It's a beautiful area, very peaceful as well. Now, this picture is actually taken from the western side of the Sea of Galilee, and it's as if we'd kind of come on down the western side on the Via Maris, which is that road that you see right there. And so we're looking, we're probably at about maybe, let's say, 10 o'clock on the clock there of the Sea of Galilee, and we're looking east across the Sea of Galilee into the Golan Heights. This is one of my favorite areas of Galilee. It's the area close to the Mount of Beatitudes. It's close to the place where Jesus may have healed the leper. It's close to the place where Jesus may have turned the bread and fishes into enough food for 5,000 people. This is a possible location for those events as well. And so you see kind of the scope of this whole area, just a beautiful, peaceful area. Now, this picture is also taken from the western side of the Sea of Galilee, and you're looking kind of south-southeast. And the reason it's taken is to show you how far down the Sea of Galilee is. This picture, if I'm not mistaken, is taken from sea level. And so you can see how far down you have to go to get to the actual sea. And then the Jordan River just keeps on going down as it goes further south. All right. Now, if you go maybe 500 yards, maybe not even that, past where the Jordan River goes out of the Sea of Galilee and continues on south, you hit the baptismal area of Yardenit, which is just barely to the south of the sea. A beautiful area, really peaceful, a little bit wider. But again, the river is not very deep here. You could probably walk across it without getting past shoulder height, maybe not even that high on some parts of it. And this is an area that's pretty safe. They know there's no landmines around here from the 1967 war. And so they've made it into a baptismal area. And we'll look at more of this later on as we go on. Then it continues on south. The distance actually between Lake Huleh to the Dead Sea is only about 75 miles. You'd think it would be more, but again, Israel's a pretty small nation. But because it twists and turns so much as a river, it's almost 200 miles long if you're actually going in a canoe all the way from Lake Huleh down to the Dead Sea. So you see some of those twists and turns there. And here, again, just really peaceful and calm. And then this is the spot that I mentioned where it's likely that Jesus was baptized. And this is called Bethany beyond the Jordan, or Betabara, which is another name for it in John 1:28. And it actually has baptismal areas on both sides. The Jordanians built one first, and you see across the river there some of the churches that are near that baptismal area. And then you see the kind of muddy, dirty river in the middle of it. And then we're taking this picture from the Israeli side, which is newer and quite a bit bigger. But again, the interesting part about this is that it's really likely that Jesus was baptized very near this spot, just north of the Dead Sea. And then you have another picture of another place where John may have baptized. And so again, that's a possibility for Jesus' baptism, but I personally think the Bethany one is a little bit closer. And then you finally see where it ends up in the Dead Sea. And as you know, the Jordan is fresh water. It's a source of a lot of the fresh water that Israel uses in Jordan as well. But then it hits the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea is extremely salty, about 10 times the normal salt amounts of a normal sea. And so nothing at all lives in the Dead Sea. There's even been stories of fish that would go all the way down the Jordan and get to the Dead Sea and turn around and go back. Don't know how they know that. Then the few unfortunate fish have gone on, and they've just kind of been penetrated by all the minerals and all the salt, and just they die right there. So it's an interesting place to be. This area, which used to be the Jordan Valley and lush and rich in the time of Lot and Abraham, so that Lot chose it, now it's pretty much like a desert. It's dry and it's hot, not much there at all, but it's an interesting place to be. And by this time, look how low it is, 1,290 feet below sea level. So it starts up about 1,000 above sea level and drops to 1,290 below. So again, that's worth studying. Go back and read the stories about the Jordan River. That'll help as well. Just one interesting picture I saw about the Dead Sea. They found a dress in the Dead Sea. Actually, they may have put it in maybe to see what would happen to it. And on the left, you see what it was like starting. On the right, you see how much salt and minerals had accumulated in it. So again, the Dead Sea is very beautiful and interesting, but also dangerous as well. Now let's go back up to Galilee, and we see a zoomed in map, particularly focusing on three of these cities, Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum, called the Evangelical Triangle, because the gospel evangelism by Jesus took place there in his ministry. And a lot of his ministry, maybe 70% of his recorded words and miracles, took place in this small triangle of about 3 miles by 3 miles by 3 miles. Again, you think of the impact of Jesus' ministry, and to consider that so much of it happened in this small area is truly amazing. And then you see some of the other cities that are mentioned in Jesus' ministry, especially on the western side of the Sea of Galilee. Again, I want to recommend to you the videos from the Above Israel series on Capernaum. There's several clips about that. And then also the videos about Bethsaida. So again, if you can get a hold of those, that would be a great blessing. Then a little bit more about Capernaum, since Capernaum is the hometown of Jesus' ministry. He grew up in Nazareth, but Luke says that then he went from Nazareth to Capernaum, and that was his home base for his ministry. During the time of Jesus, it's estimated that the town of Capernaum was a fairly good size for those days, about 2,500 people. So not just a small village, but a pretty good size. It was a center of Jewish education. People who really were respected, had studied. Many of the popular rabbis, well-known rabbis, were teaching there at that time. One person said that the amount of teaching from the rabbis from Capernaum and the Mishnah and the Talmud, some commentaries on the Jewish law, was one of the major sources of information for those books. So again, Jesus didn't go to a small out-of-the-way town that nobody knew about, nobody important was at. It was actually one of the main centers of Jewish education, along with Jerusalem. And then this in Spanish, sorry. It says between the years 0 and 100 AD, there was more Jewish teaching from the rabbis of Capernaum than all of the rest of the Jewish world combined. And so again, a huge impact of the Jewish teachers from Capernaum on the Mishnah and the Talmud. Now, if you look at a visual, an aerial view of this area, you're over the Sea of Galilee, looking back west and a little bit south. You see today what it looks like. You see the kind of octagonal church that's a Franciscan church that's built over the house of Peter. We'll go zoom in on that in a minute. Then you see the synagogue that remains from the 4th century, about the 300s AD. Not Jesus' synagogue, but built on the same foundation, it looks like. And then another church over here, Greek Orthodox church. And then right here, you see some of the houses that are actually from the 1st century. So some of these houses were likely the ones where Jesus slept, or where he shared dinner, or where he taught or did miracles. These are actually 1st century houses right here as well. Then if you zoom a little bit more in, you see more detail on it, on the synagogue especially. A little bit more on the houses both here and over here as well. And then if you were coming in from the sea, say if you were Peter and the apostles and been out fishing, this is the view that you might have had, at least the general geographical features, when they were coming in. If you come in by tour bus today and walk down a long driveway, then you come to the main entrance of Kafar Nahum, which means village of Nahum. And now, of course, they put the town of Jesus there as well, simple entry there. Then you can walk around it. They really made it nice for tourists today, really easy to get around, and they really organized a lot of the things that they found archaeologically through the years, and so you can study those. This particular picture is taken from the church, which is a little bit raised above the rest of the city or the town. It's looking across to the synagogue right here. And then right here, there's a large house, kind of a house that, insular house, they call it, that may have had several families living together at the time of Jesus. So again, we're inside the upper part of the church there. Then if you walk across to the synagogue, you see that it faces east, like many of the synagogues did. You see the little porch out front here and 3 entrances there to the main part of the synagogue. That was also very typical as well, and we'll talk more about synagogues in a later class. You walk on into the first door and you look into the main area. Again, this is from the 4th century AD, about maybe 300 years after the time of Christ. The main area, the main floor there, and then you see these little benches along both sides there and the pillars. Then you have just to the right of it, or a little bit further north, the annex, which also could have served as the school. And the school in Capernaum was one of the largest in the Jewish world at that time, again reflecting the importance of this place during the time of Jesus. Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting was that if you go around to the side and you look down just a little bit, you see a whole different kind of rock, this basalt, this basaltic rock, kind of volcanic rock, underneath the limestone foundation. The limestone is prettier, but according to what we understand, this is the foundation of the synagogue that Jesus taught in so many times there in Capernaum. To me, that was just fascinating to sit there and look at that and reach over and touch it and think this is where Jesus would spend a lot of his Sabbaths during his ministry. I thought that was really special. And if you look down a little bit further, they've actually found part of the floor of the synagogue from the 1st century. Again, the synagogue that Jesus used during his time there. Now, if you're standing outside the synagogue on that eastern porch that we showed you there, looking east, then you see the house again from the other view, and then you see where we took the picture from the first time. Let me go back to that. Right about here is where that picture was taken. And the house is built over the house of Peter right here, okay? So again, just trying to orient you a little bit with that. And then this is an older picture that I found. It's Peter's house before the construction of the Franciscan church. And so it helps you kind of go back about maybe 50 years or so and see what it looked like then. And you see some of there's actually several different walls that relate to houses and churches built around that. And so this is what it looked like without the Franciscan church on top of it, okay? And then again, if you look around the synagogue to the north, you'll see 1st century houses. You see some of the construction of them. You see the small rooms. You see they must have been pretty low roofed in some areas. You see staircases that would lead up to the roofs. And you think of the story of the friends that brought the paralytic to Jesus in Capernaum and how they went up on the roof and then dug through the roof, according to Mark, probably leaves and dirt there to lower the man in front of Jesus. So if you think of that story and look at this house, you can put together a picture of at least what that may have looked like in some way. And we don't know. I mean, this could have been the house. It was right next to the synagogue. Again, here's the synagogue in the background. And so it could have been this actual house. But again, there's no way to know that for certain. And then there's a really beautiful place. If you go to Capernaum, you should go out one of the gates that's near the Sea of Galilee, and you can walk along the shore of the Sea of Galilee there and just imagine Jesus and the apostles doing that probably quite a lot. Fishermen coming up, and they built a little devotional area, and so you can see in the background there the beautiful panorama of the Sea of Galilee, and just the peacefulness of it. Hear the waves on the shore, read and sing and think and reflect over the ministry of Jesus right where it happened. So a really special place there. To finish up this video, the first part of the Galilee videos, I want to go to now one of our 360 videos that we did. Again, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what it must have been like to stand there. Okay, now you can see it. And we're going to leave it here. We're standing on that little porch outside of the synagogue, so you kind of see into the back of the synagogue here. And then if you look over that way, we're actually filming it here, so you can play the video or just spin it like this. That was looking more south towards some of the areas where they found a lot of grindstones and other things as well. And if you continue to go on around, then you see again that house here in between the synagogue and the Franciscan church and the house of Peter underneath it. Then you look out more toward the Sea of Galilee and across the sea to the Golan Heights. And then you see more of those first century houses. And I like to imagine just who lived in what house. Which of those houses was Matthew the tax collector's house? Or which of those houses was of the woman with the flow of blood that Jesus healed? And so many of the miracles that happened there. Just imagine where Jesus would have eaten together with people and taught and slept. It's pretty amazing. And then again, coming back, looking north up toward this other area as well. So I hope that this little review of some of the cities and areas of Galilee have been helpful. In the next video about Galilee, we're going to talk about other important cities where Jesus taught and cities that have been important since that time in the history of the Jews there. So we'll see you next time. God bless you.